Of course, reminding everyone to download, rate, and subscribe to the podcast. This is the 415ers. Evan Giddings and Marc Grandy coming at you 3 times a week on the Odyssey Sports Podcast Network with 95.7 The Game. And I guess that's so, you're talking about swapping teams or weapons on certain teams. And the 49ers are certainly not the only team to be kind of underachieving this year. And I think a big reason why people believe that the 49ers are still in contention for maybe even a Super Bowl is due to the fact that the NFC is, outside of the Eagles, kind of a question mark. Like I have no clue who's good and who's not at this point, because I thought the 49ers are pretty good. They're below 500. As you can see on the screen for our YouTube audience, I thought the Green Bay Packers and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers are both pretty good. All three now are 3-4 this year. So, if we're kind of moving pieces around, like I think the 49ers skill position players with the Green Bay Packers would look much different than they
Oh
do on
my
the
goodness.
49ers. But then again, with the Buccaneers, I thought they had a pretty good skill position group coming into this season, and Tom Brady has not been able to do what he's done each of the past 2 years with them. So, who the hell knows at this point? But this is why I think it's an interesting question. Who the best 3-4 team is in the NFC? Because at the end of the year, at the end of 17 weeks, if one of these teams is back into Super Bowl contention, Mark, I don't think it'll be necessarily shocking. And I'm just curious to see which team you think right now is the best of the three.
Well, yeah, for the YouTube audience who sees the graphic down there are more 3-4 teams than just these three: the Niners, Packers,
Yeah.
Buccaneers. In addition, the Washington Commanders, the St. Louis Cardinals, the Arizona Cardinals, and a couple more actually, the Chicago Bears and the Atlanta Falcons. So there's a lot of 3-4 teams, and that's kind of the point of this conversation. There's so many teams in the NFC that are just kind of mired in mediocrity right now. I mean, heading into the season, it was a general consensus that the NFC West was the best conference, not only in the NFC, but probably in football. Right now, first place in the NFC is 4-3. The Rams are 3-3. Then the Niners and Cardinals are 3-4. And, what most people thought was the worst conference in the NFC, if not all of football, the NFC East, 6-0, 6-1, 5-2, and then 3-4. Three
They've
and
gone
four.
from the NFC least to the NFC beast, Mark.
That's exactly right. I mean, the Commanders are 3-4 in last place. They are. Let's see if I can get that in my head. 3.5 games back of technically of first place at 3-4. Meanwhile, 3-4 in the West, you're only 1 game back of first place. 3-4 in the South, you're tied for first. So that's just kind of the way that the NFC is shaping up right now. And if I had to pick one of those three, I mean, I think we can circle these three, the Niners, Packers, and Buccaneers, at least as the most talented, most likely. And there's underachievers and overachievers every year, but these are probably the three most likely, to kind of improve and maybe make some waves in the second half of the season. I'd pick the 49ers, and I'm not sure it's particularly close. The Green Bay Packers, with Aaron Rodgers, obviously a huge name, but he has struggled and he's dealing with a thumb injury. And Tom Brady, with all the drama around his personal life right now, it's weird. They have a really good defense, specifically against the run. And you mentioned their weapons. I mean, with Leonard Fournette and Mike Evans and Chris Godwin, the list goes on. They are very talented offensively. But I think when you consider the 49ers defense, who's better than all of those three, I would argue, and they're all good defenses, and then you consider the fact that this is a 49er team that has dealt with at least more injuries that you would expect them to get back again this year. The Buccaneers offensive line is, torn to shreds right now, but a lot of those are season ending injuries. The Niners have more bodies that are on the mend and should be back relatively soon. I think it gives them the edge in my book. And plus, I think overall, this Niner team is probably the most talented of those three when you consider their defense and their weapons, as we just talked about at length. I think the Niners are probably the best of the 3-4 teams in the NFC, and they're probably the most likely 3-4 team to win a postseason game and maybe to go even a step further than that.
Yeah, no, I'm almost there with you, but the difference, of course, to me is the quarterback, and I understand that Aaron Rodgers is maybe not the back-to-back MVP version of himself right now,
Oh god, not
but
even close.
there is a long ways to go, and who knows what that offense could turn into? They can't seem to catch a pass right now, especially on third down.
I think Devonte Adams was just slipping him some like secret serum or something because right when he leaves, I mean, it's like Rodgers can't remember how to play football anymore.
Well, who knows what Aaron Rodgers is on? I mean, he's
Ayahuasca again?
ayahuasca. I don't know, some sort of painkillers. Who knows what that guy's into? Some natural remedies, we'll call
Mm-hmm.
it.
Mm-hmm.
And then Tom Brady's on his own program, of course, the TB12 method, which is turning into something unforeseen. But a lot of the issues for the Bucks, as you mentioned, kind of have to do with him off the field. And so I'm not exactly sure how much I weigh that. And we got 10 weeks left in the season. Right now, I do think that the 49ers have the best overall roster. I mean, I thought they had one of the best overall rosters coming into this year. But if you just look at the schedules, I mean, right now, the Buccaneers, I believe, have the best win of all three. Like, they beat the Cowboys. Granted, it was opening week, but in pretty dominating fashion, holding Dak Prescott in that offense to 3 points. The Green Bay Packers, meanwhile, beat the Buccaneers 14-12 in a game that was largely a slug. The 49ers, I know they beat the Rams, but we've kind of questioned how good the Rams actually are. So, to me, the 49ers have the highest ceiling, but because of who's playing quarterback right now, I do think I would slightly give Tampa Bay the edge. I think the Packers don't have enough around Aaron Rodgers, and they can't stop the run on defense. The Buccaneers, to me, have maybe the best chance to sort of get right if Tom Brady and the rest of that team can sort of put all the external issues behind them. But if I'm looking up at the end of the year and the 49ers are maybe 10-7, 11-6, and they got a better record than Tampa Bay and Green Bay, I could certainly see that. Just right now, if I had to pick one to where they're going to go, I guess I'm going to rely on a larger sample size of careers, and that's
That's
that's going to
much
be with
larger.
that's going to be with Tom Brady and the Buccaneers.
One might argue too large of a sample size at this point, but
Yeah, yeah, Mark. If we could acquire the sort of sample size that Tom Brady has in any part of our lives, I think we'd be doing pretty well.
oh yeah, I consider that a win. But you said something that stood out to me. You said you think perhaps the Niners maybe have the highest ceiling of those three. Is right? That's what you said?
Yes.
So I kind of see it differently. I think maybe the Packers and the Buccaneers could potentially have the highest ceiling, at least a higher ceiling than the 49ers. It's because of who their quarterbacks are. I think the Niners probably have the safest floor. Honestly, that's how I see it. I think it's
Yeah.
because of the way that their roster is constructed and how dominant their defense has been for most of the season. The last 2 weeks have been a step backwards for sure. And their weapons on offense. The fact that you have one of the best players in football in Trent Williams. I think the Niners, and it's something that we've talked about a lot this year. I remember reacting to the Trey Lance injury saying this probably increases the Niners' chances of making the playoffs, but at the same time, maybe decreases their odds of winning a Super Bowl because you know what Jimmy Garoppolo is. He's a quarterback that generally is good enough to win you some games, win you enough games to make the playoffs. So the way I see it, I think the Niners of these three, just because of the nature of their rosters, probably has the safest floor, which probably, in my opinion, means the best chance of making the playoffs. But if someone like Aaron Rodgers and his young receiving core figure it out, it just clicks suddenly, they might have a higher ceiling because Aaron Rodgers is a two-time MVP, who's back-to-back MVP, who's been so good. If Tom Brady figures out his personal life and him and Giselle get back together and it's all, smiles again down in Tampa Bay and
TBD.
Mike Evans stays healthy and all that, maybe they have a higher ceiling than the 49ers and maybe they could catch fire and win the Super Bowl. I mean, remember back when they won the Super Bowl a few years ago, they had a slow start to the season. They won multiple road games in the playoffs to win the Super Bowl. So that's not out of the cards either. I think that's an interesting point that you made because I kind of see it the opposite way. I think the Niners probably have the safest floor of the bunch, But because of who the quarterbacks are, the other teams might have a chance, although it's a lesser chance, to kind of explode as the season goes along.
Well, and I guess maybe the potential that I'm thinking about lies more with the roster. Like, I mean, you mentioned the fact that Tampa Bay is dealing with more season-ending injuries. Green Bay, to me, has a less talented roster around Aaron Rodgers than the 49ers or the Buccaneers. But you're right. No, you're right. Tom Brady, as well as Aaron Rodgers, obviously have a higher ceiling as individuals than Jimmy Garoppolo. But I'm looking at what the Niners hopefully will be able to get back and get right. And to me, that makes them a more complete team. And when it comes to the playoffs, I know that you mentioned it on our last episode when we were talking about the preview between Kansas City and San Francisco, the fact that the 49ers might be better built for the postseason based on how they like to operate on both sides of the football. So to me, it's more about what I envision the defense getting back to and the level that they can take it. Because honestly, a lot of postseason teams that do make deep postseason runs or Super Bowl winning runs, they're very even. I mean, they have a top 5 offense sometimes on the fringe or a top 5 defense sometimes on the fringe, but it's usually a combination of both. To me, the Niners are closer to having an overall cohesive roster that complements each other than either of the two. What I'm hoping is that at least, if Tampa Bay and Green Bay are going to get back on track, yes, it does start with the quarterback, but to me, there's less around them, and it's more about them figuring things out as opposed to the 49ers. Like you mentioned, their floor is sort of already set, and it's more about getting healthy and that level that they can hopefully recapture similar defensively to the first 5 weeks than the last 2.
Well, I think in this conversation, a lot of what this boils down to when we're talking about potential postseason success, it's winning your division. So maybe an important question would be which of these teams is most likely to win their division. I think there's a clear top two, and then the third, because you look at the divisions that they're in. I mean, the Niners right now, again, are a game out, despite the fact that they've had what you should consider a disaster first 7 weeks of the season. They're 3-4. They're only a game out. And the teams ahead of them, the Rams by a half game, you have dominated them in the regular season since Shanahan has been here. And the Seahawks, who are 4-3, defying everything I thought possible in football. But in the NFC South, you have the Buccaneers, who are tied for the lead in the division with the Atlanta Falcons. And behind them, you have the fire sale Panthers, and then the Andy Dalton /
Apparently
Jameis
not.
Winston. Apparently not. They just beat the Bucks. That was wild.
Yeah.
And then beyond the Panthers, you have the Andy Dalton, Jameis Winston led Saints. So probably the Buccaneers, the most likely team to win the division, probably has less to do with them than it does who else is in that division. You could probably say similar things for the 49ers, but maybe not quite to that extent as the NFC South. Meanwhile, the Packers, they have the Vikings, who are 5-1 and playing good football coming off of a bye. So maybe that's part of the decision here. If we're talking about who is potentially going to have the most postseason success, I picked the Niners, you picked the Buccaneers, and that probably checks out because they are way more likely to win the division than the Packers are at this point. And I guess just to put it on the record, I still think the Niners are going to win the NFC West. I think they're clearly the most talented team. They are undefeated in the division right now, which is a big number considering, the way that this division has a knack of kind of beating each other up. I still think the Niners are going to win this division. And I think we'll only see them get better from this point forward. Kind of a similar, turning point as last season was when they were 3-5 and beat the Rams. It kind of does mirror how last season has gone. And I think maybe not quite as gigantic of a turnaround. I'm not sure if I see an NFC championship in the cards, but I do think this team will be much better, in the final 2/3 of the season, a little less than that, almost the final half of the season than they were in the first 7 weeks.
Well, we didn't see an NFC championship in the cards last year until they got there. So
True.
it's going to be interesting for sure. It's, as far as the question is concerned, best 3 and 4 team, based on a lot of the conversations that we've been having here in the Bay Area about San Francisco, and I'm sure they're having the same ones down in Florida. It seems to be based on who the rest of the competition is rather than the actual team itself. And so maybe it's, the worst 3 and 4 team in the NFC, the worst team in the division. because the 49ers are simply trying to clear a bar at this point. Like that's kind of what it's boiling down to.
The question is, who has been the most disappointing so far in the NFC? I mean, these are probably the three that, I mean, you could probably throw the Rams up there as well.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a lot to choose from. We'll just put it that way.
Well, and we're going to have a lot to break down on Friday when the Rams, of course, the Rams, of course, host the 49ers on Sunday. And I'm looking forward to that episode as well because there's a whole lot of questions. There's a whole lot of, as we've discussed, potential for the 49ers with their newest toy and Christian McCaffrey, but also the type of hopeful bounce back game they're going to have against Los Angeles, a team that they've dominated in the regular season. So there's a lot to break down on Friday, Mark, and I look forward to it.
Yeah, me too. Should be a lot of fun. Let's get after it.
No doubt. No doubt. We appreciate all of those of you tuning in, as always, to the 415ers podcast on the Odyssey Sports Podcast Network with 95.7 The Game. Evan Giddings and Marc Grandy coming at you. We will talk to you next time. Take it easy.